Hi folks, and a very happy new year to all of you. There's a somewhat romantic account from World War One about how after nearly 6 months of intense trench warfare, the fighting briefly ceased as Christmas Day 1914 approached. The truce started on Christmas Eve, with soldiers singing Christmas carols from their trenches and sending gifts to each other. Some men bravely walked unarmed in the desolate, forbidding no man's land between the trenches, and began associating with the enemy while they buried their dead comrades. And despite high-ranking officers from both sides forbidding their men to fraternize with the enemy, soldiers met again on Christmas Day. The men socialized, sang carols, and exchanged gifts such as chocolate cake, wine, and tobacco. In many places, the men played football. Sadly, the truce was short-lived. According to this report by a British captain, at 8:30 the next morning I fired 3 shots in the air and put up a flag with Merry Christmas on it, and I climbed on the parapet. The Germans put up a sheet with thank you on it, and the German captain appeared on the parapet. We both bowed and saluted and got down into our respective trenches. He fired 2 shots in the air, and the war was on again. With those 5 shots, Christmas 1914 had passed. And here we sit 106 years later, having just experienced another Christmas that has passed. And just as the issues that were giving rise to the hostilities of the First World War remained once January 1915 came around, the issues of last year will still need to be dealt with this year, as much as I wish it could be otherwise. However, whether one is talking about COVID, Brexit, or any other situation that we may be facing as a country at the moment, pointing fingers at one another is not going to be helpful. This isn't easy, particularly given the level of our current discourse and the poor example set by many of our leaders, fueled by social media and other platforms where one can sit anonymously behind the safety of a keyboard and rant away to our heart's content. This is easier said than done though. Human nature is such that whenever we face any sort of calamity, our first response is to look around for someone to blame. However, as I've shared before, whatever the outcome of a particular situation, whether the vaccines are successful in fighting COVID for instance, or what life after Brexit would look like, we're all going to have to live with the results together. While we are certainly encouraged that there are now vaccines to deal with COVID-19, most of the country is still in Tier 4, and the situation is not likely to improve unless we all do our part with the various measures aimed at preventing the spread of the virus. Likewise, irrespective of whether one thinks that Brexit is the greatest thing since sliced bread or the biggest example of shooting ourselves in the foot in British history, having now got a deal in place with the EU doesn't mean that it's all over and done with. While the politicians are busy patting each other's backs, the rest of us will need to digest what's in that agreement, understand its implications, and adjust our lives accordingly. Going back to the account of Christmas 1914, some of the reflections on the truce that were written afterwards are quite enlightening. One British officer wrote to the Times newspaper, "They were really magnificent in the whole thing and jolly good sorts. I have now a very different opinion of the Germans. It was then we discovered that those on the other side were not the savage barbarians we'd been told." Alfred Anderson, the last surviving British soldier to take part in the 1914 truce, said this on the History News Network. "They were like us. Why were we led to believe otherwise?" But this ironic reflection sums up how humans sadly revert to type. Both sides had started the fighting, and already enemies again. Strange it all seems, doesn't it? And if we're honest, have we learnt anything in the century that has since passed? We are no longer in a war situation, but the need to pull together as a nation is as important in the present situation as it was during any war. And as we enter 2021, perhaps our New Year's resolution should be less on what we think others should be doing, but about what we know that we need to be doing.